And I wondered if you could speak to a little bit about what eventually gave way to the protests in 2019. How did we find ourselves in that spot?
So I think well, wait, how far back do you want to go? So, this is the. I want to focus mostly on going forward. This is the third event of the launch for this edition, and the first event was in Cambridge at Heffer's bookstore with Julia Lovell, who's written an important and impressive book on the Opium War. And I said Julia Lovell was the perfect interlocutor because that's the sort of origin point of Hong Kong as a city, was when there were people living in what became Hong Kong, but Hong Kong as it evolved into a city was the Opium War. So I said she was the perfect interlocutor. And then yesterday I did a bookstore event at Blackwell's in Oxford, and 𝗘𝘃𝗲𝗁, who's written a lot about the end of communism in Eastern and Central Europe, and 1989 in Eastern Europe, I said he's the perfect interlocutor for the book because to think about moments of enormous protest. But then when I knew I was going to do this with David, I thought, okay, and I can say he's the perfect interlocutor for the end of the book, which is this kind of the absorption and the pressures to conform. So I believe that's all true, but we need to figure out how we get to that 2019 and after. And I think that the real starting point for this is the agreement for the handover of Hong Kong that Margaret Thatcher reached with the Beijing authorities in 1984, and then that led to the handover in 1997. And I won't rehearse everything about that except to say the idea was that there would be something called one country, two systems, which would be Hong Kong would become part of the country, the People's Republic of China, but it would be able to maintain a distinctive system. And everybody agreed on two things about that. Everybody agreed that Hong Kong would not have its own, once it became part of the People's Republic of China, it would not have its own diplomatic policies. It would not have, and everybody agreed on something else about the two systems. It would have a different economic system. It would have a stock market governed by different kinds of rules. And so everybody agreed about that. Everybody wanted it to go its own way economically to some extent, and not go its own way diplomatically. But other things, there were from the start differences of opinion about how much was in that bucket of a separate system. And there was also something else about the agreement. The agreement was, over time, Hong Kong people would run Hong Kong. The disagreement was, from Beijing's point of view, Chinese Communist Party, Hong Kong people, somebody who is ethnically Chinese of Hong Kong should be the chief executive rather than a white man appointed by London, which had been a process under colonial rule. But they didn't think it was important that that person be elected through an open election. They thought it should be just chosen with an election where the only people who could stand for office were people that they thought were acceptable kinds of, were people who would work with them. Local people thought, well, actually, if we're going to be determining our own fate, shouldn't we have free and open elections? Should a freer press? Hong Kong, the press wasn't completely free under British colonialism, but it was much freer than any part of the mainland. Should that be part of the two systems or not? What about independent courts? Should that be part of the separate systems or not? What about decisions about things that were in Hong Kong but connected to the mainland, like rail lines? So over time, initially, in part because the People's Republic of China wanted to gain access to WTO, they wanted to be part of that, and they wanted to host the Olympics. There was a sense in which there was a push and pull between people who wanted a kind of maximalist definition of the two systems and a minimalist. Beijing wanted a minimalist one, basically, let the horse races go on, let the shopping centers go on, but let's not have as freewheeling a press. And gradually over time, Beijing started clamping, sort of moving toward what local people said it's looking more like one country, 1.8 systems, 1.7 systems, 1.6, and over time it will just be one country, one system. So they pushed back. Education was something that was very different in Hong Kong. In 2012, there was a proposal to bring patriotic education into the Hong Kong schools, where you wouldn't be able to teach in Hong Kong schools about things like Tiananmen and the Great Leap Forward the way you could in Hong Kong, but not on the mainland. So some young people, including Joshua Wong and Agnes Chow, who would continue to be important in later times, they organized to push back, and they had what they called an anti-brainwashing movement. And amazingly, they got the authorities to back down, and that emboldened them. But the process was still going on. It seemed inexorable. So in 2014, the umbrella movement was to try to, once and for all, have complete elections for all offices, rather than just have elections for the legislature, but some parts of the legislature basically set aside so that it would be people who could work with the establishment, and the chief executive being handpicked. He was elected, but it was really selected. 2,000 Hong Kong electors, who themselves were carefully stage managed, would decide who could be. And then after the umbrella movement for universal suffrage ended with that, very dramatic, it was the biggest sustained social movement in the People's Republic of China since Tiananmen, until it was surpassed by 2019. But then after it didn't get that, it didn't succeed. Then there was a kind of despondency as this moves came on, and some of them were not subtle, but there was a high-speed railway line that ended up in Hong Kong, and the security was partly controlled by the mainland. And who controls your security is kind of a sign of your control of your own place. So these were going, and then in early 2019, there were a call for an extradition bill that would have made it possible for people to be brought over to the mainland to have to stand trial, even if they were in Hong Kong. And on the mainland, there's a 98, 99% conviction rate. So this was going to be, people felt, the end of legal independence courts. So there were protests that grew larger than anybody expected, but it was because it seemed like a last stand. There had been so much chipping away. It had been down to one country, 1.3 systems, or whatever in people's minds. If we don't push back now, it might be never. And young people and younger people got involved, in part because they felt they were the ones who were going to be living the bulk of their life in a city that had become, in many ways, like a mainland one.